Hey Pop, I keep hearing people on the news talking about the foreclosure problem, but I do not really understand the foreclosure problem or what they mean about liar loans, robo-signers, and the MERS database, and mortgage-backed security fraud.
Son, these issues appear to be complex. However, a few analogies should help clear up your confusion. Do you remember, when you were a child, I would buy you plastic jars with bubble fluid? You would take off the top and find a piece of plastic with holes in them, and dipping the wand into the fluid would let you blow bubbles.
Yes Pop, I do remember the plastic jars, and the wand, and sitting on the deck happily blowing bubbles for hours.
Good you remember. Now at all the time you played with those plastic bubble jars, did you ever see a bubble blow itself?
Ha ha ha, this sounds like an X-rated movie about why a dog licks itself. Because it can, ha ha ha.
Son, you are right. The story about fraud by the banks is an X-rated story, full of violence and orgies of financial greed. But my point is that bubbles do not blow themselves. So the first thing you must understand is that if there is a bubble, it did not happen by itself. Someone was blowing.
Okay Pop, so you were saying that someone blew the housing bubble up, that it did not occur all by itself? So who was blowing? Was it congressman? Like that gay guy Barney Frank?
Son, you should not poke fun at Mr. Frank, because he is gay. Gay is a natural occurrence, and is no funnier than any other sexual orientation. You should make fun of Barney Frank, because of the way he talks, and because he is so fat, that his face and lips are covered with sweat. At least I hope it is sweat. But I digress. To answer your question, Congress is filled with nincompoops, who are incapable of blowing bubbles without the help of smart people motivated by a new unholy lust for money. Regardless of who they hurt getting the money.
Well okay Pop, so if Congress did not blow the bubble, who did?
Son, the bubble was blown by the Goldman Sachs.
So the bad guy in this movie is the Goldman Sachs?
Yes.
Who is the Goldman Sachs?
The Goldman Sachs was best described by a man named Matt Taibbi. Mr. Taibbi said, "The first thing you need to know about the Goldman Sachs is that it's everywhere. The world's most powerful investment bank is a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money. In fact, the history of the recent financial crisis, which doubles as a history of the rapid decline and fall of the suddenly swindled dry American empire, reads like a who's who of the Goldman Sachs graduates."
Ha ha ha, I like the way Mr. Taibbi talks.
Yes, I do too. Matt Taibbi writes for the Rolling Stone, and he is required reading for anyone who throws up a little in their mouth when they hear the Glenn Beck, but again I digress. The point about the Goldman Sachs is that it trains very smart men on how to steal from the American public, indeed how to steal from the world, and after it trains these very smart men, the Goldman Sachs installs them in very high positions throughout the government and the banking industry. Mr. Taibbi lists some of the prodigal sons of the Goldman Sachs in his article in the Rolling Stone as follows. By now, most of us know the major players. As George Bush's last Treasury Secretary, former Goldman CEO Henry Paulson was the architect of the bailout, a suspiciously self-serving plan to funnel trillions of your dollars to a handful of his old friends on Wall Street. Robert Rubin, Bill Clinton's former Treasury Secretary, spent 26 years at Goldman before becoming chairman of Citigroup, which in turn got a $300 billion taxpayer bailout from Paulson. There's John Thing, the asshole chief of Merrill Lynch, who bought an $87,000 area rug for his office as his company was imploding. A former Goldman banker, Thane enjoyed a multi-billion-dollar handout from Paulson, who used billions in taxpayer funds to help Bank of America rescue Thane's sorry company. And Robert Steele, the former Goldman Knight head of Wachovia, scored himself and his fellow executives $225 million in golden parachute payments as his bank was self-destructing. There's Joshua Bolten, Bush's chief of staff during the bailout, and Mark Patterson, the current Treasury chief of staff, who was a Goldman lobbyist just a year ago, and Ed Liddy, the former Goldman director whom Paulson put in charge of bailed out insurance giant AIG, which forked over $13 billion to Goldman after Liddy came on board. The heads of the Canadian and Italian national banks are Goldman alums, as is the head of the World Bank, the head of the New York Stock Exchange, the last two heads of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which, incidentally, is now in charge of overseeing Goldman, not to mention. Well, let's leave it there. I think you get the point.
Why does the government and the banking industry allow the Goldman Sachs to install the very smart men it has trained throughout the government and the banking industry?
Because as I told you, Congress is filled with nincompoops who need very smart men to tell them how things work and what they should do, and because these very smart men installed throughout the government and banking industry by the Goldman Sachs appear to be mortals rather than the blood-sucking vampires that they really are. The nincompoops in Congress just do as they are told, and in return, get bags of money from the Goldman Sachs.
Okay Pop, I think I've got it so far. The housing bubble did not blow itself. It was blown by the Goldman Sachs, and the Goldman Sachs runs the government and the banking industry. Is that pretty much it?
Yes son, that is it exactly. The bubble was created on purpose by the Goldman Sachs, and the Goldman Sachs runs the government and the banking industry. If you understand those 2 points, you have a complete foundation to understand the rest of the story about liar loans, robo-signers, MERS, mortgage-backed securities, and the giant fraud perpetrated on we the sheeple of the United States of America. I need to go check the mail. I'm waiting on some American Silver Eagles. You should buy some too so that we can crash JP Morgan's illegal short position. So let's say that this ends part 1 of our story. I will meet you back here for part 2 in just a minute.